So with that being said, Carol, go ahead. You can take it away.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Super excited. This is a subject that I get super passionate about. Yeah, we were trying to make sure that I wasn't heading the meeting because Heather's the host. So for some reason I was the host and I don't want to be the host. She's got to like do all that. So we had to switch roles and we're like, okay, get Heather to be the leader here of this. So we're going to get started. We'll get going. Lots of information, of course. I wanted to go over just a little bit about the past classes and the future classes. Of course, we've had several past classes. You know, okay is the magical word. That's how to follow instructions, how to help your kid feel okay, and the boundary parenting class. So some of this I will refer to as like, okay, so this is one part of shame resilience parenting is boundaries. Well, we're going to have to just go back to how to have boundaries with parenting. So if you want those prior classes, we have them. I have the PowerPoints for them. If you're new to this or a new company, then we can always send you those. And then invite people, every month to keep attending. They're just every second Wednesday at 12. So, and you don't, have to always watch the whole thing or anything, because we send you the video afterwards with the with handouts if I have any. So no big deal. And this is I want a little bit of discussion, so hopefully we have enough time to like talk about halfway through here or at the end about your own shame story a little bit, and like what really sets us into shame. So you can do a chat with Heather, and then she can relay it to me. So it's, so your voice, your name isn't, so it kind of keeps it separate. So you can always do a private chat to Heather, and we're just glad that we can have this resource. It's nice to just kind of zoom in, right? So pain, yeah, shame, yeah, we're in some pain when we're in shame. So pain, emotionally, this is like a little bit of educational. We have to go into educational stuff about shame. So we have to understand what it is, what triggers it, and this is what the questions that we're going to go through. Hopefully we get through all these. So like, what is shame, of course, and the difference between guilt and shame, because that's super important. Of course, I have all the resources and all the books at the end of this PowerPoint, but shame is a primary emotion. I have my own little emotional wheel, and shame is in the primary. So sad, mad, happy, scared, shame. So shame leads to a whole bunch of other things. We're going to talk about that. How shame survives. I'm a big visual, so it's like, wow, we're going to grow shame or we're going to kill shame. So we're going to grow empathy, which is the opposite of shame, or we're going to kill shame. And how do we do that? What activates shame? How shame is a defense mechanism. Oh, I love going into 5-letter freeze and how the brain works. I could go into that all day. And then how was shame used in your childhood? Because of course, from fight, flight, or freeze, our defense mechanism, we go into those same neural pathways as how we survived as a child through shame. And then there's a 3-minute video about empathy versus sympathy by Brene Brown. And then we're going to recap about, of course, how do we combat shame in parenting. But it's really about shame. This is lots of information about shame. And then, of course, I go through how to parent without shame, because shame is not what we want to do. So on to how to know the difference between shame and guilt. So guilt is, I did something bad. So if we didn't have guilt, we would not have any remorse. It's called, you don't have human regard for others. You keep on using the abuse cycle, harming yourself or others, like just because we don't have guilt, and it's repetitive. If we don't have guilt, if we don't feel like we've done something bad, then, guilt doesn't set in. And so guilt is a good thing. And so it it just the biggest thing, the easiest thing to remember is shame is I am bad, guilt is I did something bad. So here's guilt. I did something bad. I work in the court system. I teach court ordered classes, and so if they just did something bad and they had to come into a class, but they're not bad, so it's like, and so when I teach this, it's like, okay, so if you didn't have guilt, you wouldn't repair. So repair is super important. Now I call mommy guilt, or daddy guilt, like we rescue out of guilt sometimes, and we'll talk about that. And so we feel guilty, but we don't feel like a flawed person. If we're in shame, we feel like a flawed person. If we're guilty, we're just like, oh, I feel guilty. So for yelling at my kid yesterday. So how do I repair that today? So you can read those, primary emotion of feelings of worthlessness, insecure, less than, flawed, inadequate, distressed, hurt, rejected, unloved, unsafe, weak, vulnerable, raw. And I have the next one it has a little, visual of those feelings. So here's the primary, again, primary shame emotion. And then what it leads to is a whole bunch of dangerous things. Now, but all emotions are good. So that's how I teach it. All emotions are just signs. But if we stay in that shame, that's when it's dangerous. And weakness is not dangerous. Vulnerability is not dangerous, because shame in Brene Brown's research showed over and over again that we looked at emotion as weakness. It's not. So all emotions are good, but shame is just something we don't want to sit in very long. We're going to sit in it. I don't know of a day that goes by that society or someone or yourself doesn't shame, your core. So it's like shame. Oh, wait, I'm kind of a flawed person. I feel like a flawed person. Or no, wait, I'm not good enough, thin enough. She goes through all those years of research. So I'm going to talk about her a lot. She's all referenced in the end of this PowerPoint. She has 17 years of research. If you haven't heard of Brene Brown, she's a shame vulnerability researcher. She's a grounded theorist. So she didn't set out to study shame or vulnerability, but that's what ended up coming out of the research that she did. And she's quite famous. TED Talks, Netflix, Audibles, and several. I mean, I've got a whole stack over here on my, of her books. So that's where this stems from. She does talk about parenting, but in general, just, here's the shame grumbling, as she calls it. So this is the shame cycle that I kind of came up with, like with just in general, like some secondary emotions from shame. So here's shame, and here's what happens in the shame emotion is I feel worthless, I feel weak, I'm incapable, I feel, you can be flooded, and that's the fight, flight, or freeze that we're going to talk about. You feel raw, inadequate, disconnected. And so bullying is an epidemic with shame. Shame is very much tied to bullying in her research. Of course, that is shame. You're a flawed person, so I'm going to bully you. I feel like a flawed person, so I'm going to bully you. So it's like when you're in shame, you usually shame others. So this is why we have to go into our own shame cycle. This is about us. This is about us as a parent. This is us as a human, because we have to do that work ourselves first, because we can't give our child anything that we don't have. So I can't give my child, complete worthiness if I feel worthless. You see? So if I feel weak and incapable, how am I supposed to help them feel capable and worthy and powerful? So it's just, that's where we're going to go a little bit. So, and I know that's so much fun, because then we're going to go, we're going to get into deep stuff. This is all deep. I always go like 10 steps deep of like really what's going on. And so, of course, we have to go back a little bit of where shame happened in our childhood and what that did to us, because her research of thousands of people she interviewed has a great big shame cycle, because that turns into thinking errors of shame and shoulds. The should thinking errors, I should have done this, I should have done that, and that turns into shame, like, oh, I'm a flawed person because I should have done this, I should have done that. And then we go into perfectionism with it. We have lots of deep-rooted issues. So that's why this is so important. So how does it be, how do we kill shame and grow empathy? So we kind of have to understand empathy. So my glasses. So empathy. So of course, empathy. There's some statements that I despise, and I try to not say hate. I just despise them. That came from a long time ago, somewhere, like some generation, I don't know. But there's one that says, we got to walk in people's shoes to get them. The other one is, never go to bed angry. And the other one is, it takes two to tango. It doesn't. All those are very high miss, because I can bunk them, I call them. I can bunk it with like, okay, number one, you got to walk in somebody's shoes. That's empathy. No, it's not. So that's a physical thing. So if we have to walk in someone's shoes physically, okay, so we just have to remember, you might, take that statement and go into the emotional, which is fine. You just got to make sure you're not going into the physical, because we don't have to walk in people's shoes. I don't have to physically walk in anybody's shoes. It's impossible, because the event is never the same for any of us ever. So it's the same emotion. So I have had shame. We have all had shame. There's no doubt that every human on the planet has been in shame and has been shamed, that they feel like a flawed person, that they feel less than. And so empathy is sitting in someone's space emotionally only, because I can't be in anyone's event. It's never, ever, ever the same. So how can I empathize with someone, that has been in jail overnight? Well, that's one of a very shameful experience. So we go into the emotion. It's not the event. Same thing with death and crisis and trauma. Everybody's trauma and crisis and just tragic and suffering is different for everyone. But you can be in the same grief, loss, and trauma and powerless feeling or shame. So here's the emotions. It's about being in someone's space, in the emotional space. So that's what empathy is. And we're going to talk about empathy and sympathy later with that little video, because she has the most cutest, perfect video about sympathy. Sympathy is, oh, you poor thing. Empathy is, I can hear you, sit with you, be in your emotion. I don't have to, take it on, because that's personalization. That's a thinking error. That's the number 10 of my thinking errors. So it's like, I'm not going to take on your problems when I have no control over it, but I can sit in your emotion. So that's really important to understand what empathy really is. And that is something that can and most likely has to be taught. Okay. So that just doesn't come sometimes. So our emotional intelligence doesn't come. Most people in her research, they know three, this is her quoting this, 3 emotions: sad, happy, and pissed off. And I don't count pissed off as an emotion, but that's what the 3 main emotions that humans, adults and most kids can get to. Those 3 emotions. Those are primary emotions, but technically we need to have 30 secondary emotions that we know and that we feel. And I have people in session really search for those emotions and get up to 30 emotions a day. You should have 30 secondary emotions a day, and you should be able to recognize them. So you can have empathy in other people's space. So that's taught to me. I teach emotional coaching, which is actually next month's class. So creativity. She talks about this a ton. It's my favorite, because how the brain works is the depressive brain and the creative brain can't light up at the same time. So end of story. So we want to be creative, something that expresses creativity that you don't do perfectly. Okay. Think about it. We're in such a perfection world, right? Of Johnny, you don't do that right. You don't color in the lines. You're coloring a dog blue, and I have my little Look, I have my little blue dog right here to remind me of that. So it's like, no, it's like, what is that? It's just creative. So it's expressive imperfectly. So you're expressing something imperfectly. So over and over and over again, we want to be imperfect. So you can't do it perfectly. And that's creativity, really. And you think about it. So play, opposite of violence and depression, in the brain. Once again, if you want to oppose violence and depression, you do creativity things and play. So her guidepost in Gifts of Imperfection, I don't remember which one that is. I know which one 5 is and 40, but there's a imposing play is one of the guideposts. So we've got to have time without purpose. Isn't that, when's the last time your family had time together and just played without purpose? Zero. And there's zero purpose. There's just sitting in that space. That's, once again. So in her research, what kills shame, that we're going to talk about in a minute, but what grows empathy, which is the opposite of shame, is courage, connection, compassion. So what happens is, if you want to have courage, connection, compassion, you can't be in shame. So courage, to be silly, to be uncool, to have hard work as a value. That's courage, right? You teach those things. Connection, that's just intertwined, tuned in. You got to be connected. Compassion. So do you see how courage, compassion, connection could be killed by shame? Because if you're in shame, you're not going to be courageous, you're not going to be connected, and you're not going to be compassionate, which is a form of empathy. So compassionate, you're going to bully, you're going to displace, you're going to not be compassionate and kind. So confronted with other sufferings in the dark. So what does that mean with another suffering, with another, another suffering? So another person's suffering in the dark. I'm going to talk about that in the video, because so if do you always run in and turn on the light? As parents, do we rescue? Do we go and just hurry and turn on the light when someone's in a dark spot? Do we just sit in the dark for a minute? Is it okay to sit in the dark? That's compassion, that's empathy. Yes, you have to. I want you to sit in the dark with your kid in a dark spot, in a violent, rage of something. Yes, sit in, as long as you don't hurt yourself further. That's always my bar in therapy, is like, okay, so when people come to you, when your child comes to you and they feel dark, for lack of better, just suffering, then, is it uncomfortable for you to sit in that strong emotion? A lot of couples I work with, it's really hard for them to sit in their partner's tough emotion, which I call a strong emotion. They're all good, they're just really strong. So an 8, 9, or 10 out of 10, that's a really strong emotion. So do you have a hard time sitting in your kid's emotion? And when I see a parent doing that, I get super excited. I'm like, oh my God, and I celebrate it. And people think I'm nuts because I call that Slurpee Day. So Slurpees are the worst thing that you can put in your body. They have every flavor and, just like sugar, lots of sugar, so just, it's Slurpee Day. You go get a Slurpee, because that's a celebration that you sat in a deep emotion and you got through it. And then you talked about it later, and then you repair it with a connection, which is Slurpee Day. It's not really about the sugar, and it's not about going to get a treat. It's about the connection of it and the repair of it. So being heard and seen. Okay, so this is what I see most often with kids and teens, is I just don't feel understood. And I don't feel heard and seen. So think about the last time you didn't feel heard and seen. That's a secondary emotion of I feel invisible. So when people ignore you, when someone else throws out a bid, I call it from Gottman, and you get ignored, that's not a good feeling. That's extremely shameful. So when you don't feel understood, habit 5 of Stephen Covey, I didn't put him in the reference, but I always talk about habit 5. How do you seek to understand first before you're understood? That's empathy, that's connection, that's compassion. How do you seek to understand before you're understood? Just read that habit 5. Bravery, of course, this grows empathy because courageous behavior, you have to model that as a parent. We're going to talk about modeling. Spirituality, she talks about that a lot. Celebrating, connecting to the power greater than ourselves. It's one way that combats shame and grows empathy. So we have more, when we're celebrating or connecting to something bigger, we definitely grow empathy. So getting in the swamp, she talks about the swamp and rising strong. She talks about the swamp in lots of her audio, seminars and stuff. So that's what that means. It's like, how do we jump in the swamp of mucky crap? I call it pond scum. So here's the rain and the clouds, and here's the water, but then here's like 10 steps under is pond scum. How do we get to the pond scum? How do you get in? How do you go in? That's the scariest part. And if you haven't gone in for a while, then that's some work that you have to do to be able to model to your child. Let's get in the swamp. Let's get dirty. Let's get in the gremlins. Let's get into that sick, just hard spot. And this is why we have defense mechanisms and why we stonewall that and don't do it, because it's scary as heck. That's it. Okay. So 4th grade, her research shows that 4th grade was a pivotal point. Okay. Now I see that also 3rd, 4th grade, pivotal. It's when shame sets in. It's when bullying right now, if you don't know how this is working, if you maybe have toddlers, we have a bullying epidemic, and it is so geared to shame. And 4th grade is where it really sits in. 3rd, 4th grade, it's younger and younger than we've ever seen it. We compare ourselves to others at 4th grade. So we start saying, wait, I'm different because someone told me I am. And it's a developmental stage. It really is. So, 5th and 6th, it's like, it's a really different time, right? But it's definitely not 6th anymore, it's 4th. So we're looking inside of ourselves in that developmental stage and comparing ourselves to others. And that's when bullying sets in too, because we feel flawed from some reason, somewhere, someone's told us that we're flawed, or we're telling ourselves that. And then what kills empathy is practice killing shame. So we grow empathy and we kill shame. Did I say that right? Practice killing shame. So this is just practice. Do not beat yourself up and blame yourself and shame yourself for not being perfect in being shameless or shameful, or and so it's just because that shows the cycle, right? You're teaching, oh wait, I really screwed up, okay, or I'm a flawed person, so I screwed up, so how do we repair that? Or I'm a flawed person. So you have to model that. Well, we're gonna have to go on to what grows shame. So number 1 in Brene Brown's research showed people that had shame resilience. Okay, so resilience, of course, had more courage, connection, compassion, and creativity. So I always add the other C because she talks about that a lot. But the first 3 is courage, compassion, and connection. But if you add creativity to it, yeah, you're combating shame all the time. So you get creative. But what she found that people over and over again, there was one thing that combated shame the most. The people that got out of it faster, that didn't stay in it as long, or was the people that had boundaries. So, and that, like I said, that boundary parenting class was a couple months ago, and it was, so we have the information on that if you want that. It's, yeah, we got to have, so now that we have the boundaries, and I kind of set these classes up because it's kind of like, okay, we understand that. We got the boundaries going, because then we're going to do shame resilience, and then we have to know how to emotionally coach, and not through shame though. So set boundaries. Zero. So the example that I always say, like, you set up your value systems according to your boundaries, and your boundaries according to your value system in your home. So whatever that looks like, if you haven't sat down with your family and gone over your home values, your moral codes, then you need to do that. Because how do we know what those are? If your value system is eating dinner 3 times a week that I've talked about, which is a different value of like health or saving money or connection. So your value is connection because you're sitting down together. Then it's not about anything about healthy. It's about connection. And of course, I'll say it a million times in every one of these that eating dinner together shows more shame resilience and other problems in the home that are reduced over and over and over again, besides anything else that you can do is eating dinner together. But the other, for an example, like zero name calling. So if you have a value of we don't shame in our home, which is bullying, okay, because shame is you're a flawed person and I'm going to make fun of you. And so name calling is just not acceptable. So what's that limit and what's the boundary? And then what happens if someone ends up, doing that? So I see a lot of bullying inside the family. And Brene Brown talks about that of like, wait, why are we allowing that to go on between siblings? And you do your best. Yeah. And once again, I always think of my own childhood with 6 siblings. So, it's like, but it's like, no, that's not allowed. But you have to model that. So if you are shaming or name calling or, wow, why did you do that? You're such a, then you can't, then the boundary is not going to be held because modeling is number one. So what grows shame second here is secrecy and silence. So I always say, I have like favorite quotes from Brene Brown stuff. And one of them is, people have to earn the right to hear your story. So think about it. People have to earn the right to hear your story, your shame story, or any story. So does that mean we keep it silent? Secrecy. So it's like, okay, or do we just tell those shame stories and let out the secrecy to people that we trust? Yes. So honest conversation with our kids. Honest conversation. Silence does not work. It grows shame. So, and the other quote of hers is, shame hates the story to be told. It hates it. And that's when I use hate. So it hates the story to be told. So think about your shame story that has been silent for years or months, and how that shame loves secrecy. Shame grows like a petri dish of shame when that story is not told. So, but remember that little but in there, yet people have to earn the right to hear your story. So you know where you've told a shame story and it got spread, rumors, or someone made fun of you because of it, and then they shamed you because you told your shame story. That's really disappointing. That's tough. So don't shame your kid when they tell you a shame story, because it's, once again, that to me, that's a celebration. Be in their space when they have shame and they're feeling flawed and they feel like someone's, especially in bullying. I talk about bullying in my office every single session with every single kid. I check in with them every time because, hey, you being bullied? Hey, are you bullying? Are you in shame? Are you bullying other people? So shame and judgment, blame, criticism, and contempt. So we all know what judgment and shame is. Blame. So judgment, blame. Criticism and contempt is 2 of the 4 horsemen of Gottman. So criticism and contempt is passive aggressive, rolling your eyes, like, why would you say that? Or that's shame. That's passive. Like, what are you thinking? Why would you even do that? And you're like, oh, I don't know. Why should you do that? Why did you, you should have learned your lesson from that. So that's contempt and criticism. Not helpful, doesn't work, never has, never will. And we get into that. What about constructive criticism and constructive shame? Yeah, I don't believe in it. I mean, just because years and years of research of Gottman about criticism, and then this is connected to shame. So if it's shame-based, doesn't work because it goes into I'm a worthless person. I'm not enough. I don't have the capability of making my own choices. And that was last month's parenting class on love and logics. So when you give the child the ability to make their choices, they feel enough. They feel like they have control and power over that they're capable of making a choice. When we take all those away and we rescue or we drill sergeant, it doesn't work. So disconnection. So what grows shame? Disconnection. So the definition of disconnection is breaking apart. We turn on the light too fast. So back to the darkness. We can't sit in emotion. So what do? We fix it. We can't fix everything. We can't go to fix mode because that tells the child that they're unimportant, that they're misunderstood, that you're just here to fix it and rescue, and it doesn't work. In today's society and parenting and kids, it's not working. It's not working. I don't need to turn on the light and rescue. Eventually, I want to turn on the light and show. So then it's like analogy again. Let's just turn on this lamp. Let's move through this slowly, and I'm going to help you coach and challenge how to get through this shame trauma experience that someone has just had, or bullying. So we can't just go straight to fix it. So what grows shame? Trauma. I mean, think about it. Trauma. Trauma of childhood, trauma of now, trauma of being bullied, trauma of the fear response. Brain goes into defense mode and says, wow, you are worthless. And that's all in the back midbrain. Up here is where we do self-talk, and I talk about that next. So not belonging, one of her books, and I don't have it referenced on the end of this PowerPoint, but it's Braving the Wilderness. It's about how to belong. So if you feel like you don't belong somewhere and your child is having a really hard time belonging, and they just don't feel cool, and we kind of like, she has a story about her family, Brene Brown, about that. Like we've made it a rule that we just, we don't have to be cool in this household. We don't have to, be the cool kids. We can just be whatever we want to do. We don't have to be perfect. There is a gray area that we can be. It's not black and white. It's not perfection, because that's a thinking error also. And that's a black and white is I can't see your perspective. A gray is like, okay, I can see your perspective. I'm not going to agree with that, or I'm going to help you be in your space and I can see your perspective. That's gray to me. So black and white doesn't work. Perfectionism doesn't work. Okay. Hey, okay. Are we doing okay, everybody? I hope. Since everyone's muted, you can't tell me. So it's funny, right? So here's the dark part and the light. See, I love analogies. So, and one of her little quotes was, I can't numb the darkness without numbing the light. We cannot numb this side of the emotions without numbing this side of the emotions. And I talk about substance abuse all the time because I do that in my other job, like too. And I understand how the frontal lobes work with numbing. So what happens is when we're numbing this, we don't self-talk and we're in the back of the midbrain. So we numb the darkness we can't numb the light without the dark. So we have to like let in a little bit of here and there. But if we're in dark, we're gonna, and we're numbed and we're burned out. And I'm talking about just parents. This is us, right? Then, we're numbing the light too. So we're numbing the darkness and the light at the same time, if that makes sense. So here's shame. So flawed. I'm a flawed person. And that leads to some sort of external or internal trigger. And I usually call activator. I don't really love trigger, but it's because it's an activator that actually activates the brain, which activates the body, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. So it's an internal or external. And it's usually from stockpiled hurt. So in anger management, it's stuffers turn into volcanoes. Okay. Numbing, disconnection, resentment. So In couples and families, I see the most, what this is a root issue that goes from flawed to a root pond scum, I call it, right? Root or a tree, very rooted, very pond scum, resentment. So we numb because it's a defense mechanism. We numb. We displace because it's a defense mechanism. We blame someone else for what we do. And then we have severe rooted resentment. So that's where that stems from. This is why it's so important to combat shame, because what it leads to, right? I am super passionate about it. It's super important. So the flight, or freeze mechanism, I've been kind of bringing you into that this last couple slides. So here's our defense mechanism. It keeps us alive. We would not be alive without it. I love teaching about this because this is how the brain works. I teach a really mean 3-hour class basically on this whole thing in my other job. So our fear response brain is our body's automatic built-in system designed to protect us from death, from threats, from abuse, from everything that doesn't feel good. So what if we do that in a relationship though? So here's the bear, we're going to run from the bear or the dog or the car accident, or so it's going to keep us alive, or the saber-tooth tiger, I say, right? So here's our defense, like it kept us alive, but does it do us well or justice if we do it in a relationship? So our defense mechanisms come in, and shame is one of the biggest rooted issues of that. So that's just the little brain thing over there, that little visual. That's how the brain works. We have a thought that comes in, if that's a thinking error. Then we self-talk and have a physiological body response. Then we have a feeling, because if we have a thinking error, I'm a flawed person. I should have done that. That's number 7 on my list for a thinking error. I should have done that. Shoulds are not healthy. Then we have a physiological, and we're self-talking, wow, I should have done that. And then we have a feeling of, oh, I'm a flawed person. I'm stupid. And then the behavior is what? We displace on someone, we shut down, we, go get blackout drunk. I don't know, right? There's lots of behaviors. So we want to watch those, and so we can have a better behavior. Now, if you're in your fight flight, you are not self-talking. We don't self-talk when we're back here. A lot of my 14 disorders sit in the midbrain. So we don't have as much, when we're in those disorders, we don't have as much self-talk. For example, PTSD, ADHD, autism, I could go on and on. So we don't do as much self-talk. So we have to find ways, therapy, SSRIs, to help us get here more. So 85% of women and men interviewed in the shame research could go back to a childhood specific shame story, an incident of being extremely shamed as a childhood, of course. And then back to shame, faith, history, found resilience and healing through spirituality, because they've had 50% of them have had experienced shame in a faith, religion, history, but then they heal through that through spirituality. So faith, spirituality, religion, all different things. Okay, so that leads us to, every time I change slides, it's a so. So how was shame used in your childhood? We have to dig into this ourselves. I had very many, all I can say is shame cycles and shame experiences in my childhood, which most people have. From her research, we've gotten better in shame parenting, lots better, and shame incidences from teachers, but there's still those digs that happen today. And so we have to listen to those. We have to, combat those. When you get to your worthiness is a birthright and not something you have to earn. It is a beautiful thing. And I definitely have worked on that my whole entire life. Being a foster parent, going through 13 years of schooling, going through lots of my own therapy, just normal stuff of where is my worthiness as a birthright, not something I have to earn. I have worthiness. So if we're not there, how in the world are we going to give that to our children? Um, remember, if we're in shame, we're going to shame. If I'm flawed, I'm going to help others feel flawed around me. But when we get out of shame, you have to wait. So wait for a minute when you to have a conversation to repair something is to get out of shame. And she talks about how to get out of shame, you know, um, and how to, know that when you're in it, don't do anything. She says you don't email, you don't say something, you don't text somebody. When you're in shame, don't email that person and go off on them, because that's what will happen. So same thing with parenting. When you feel shamed, and man, I feel really flawed. I feel like such a lousy person right now. And I'm going to have to go calm that down for a minute because I want to talk to you about this later. So you just talk like that. You have to get to your vulnerability. And when you feel worthless, what happens? You go into your fight or flight. Promise. We are not self-talking very well. And we go, so we can get angry. So we go into fight, or we go into freeze and we shut down. So when do you feel inspired by courage? When did you feel inspired by courage from someone during your childhood? I had a coach, a track coach, that I will never forget how inspiring he was to me. He actually bought me a pair of New Balance tennis shoes because I was a poor kid. We were poor. I didn't have shoes. I didn't have good running shoes. So man, that courage gave me inspiration, courage that I had never felt for a really long time. So one person gave you that as a child, and it made all the difference for the rest of my life in running and exercise and feeling like I'm an okay person. Isn't that such a strong thing we can give to our kids or some stranger? So don't shame or blame. Past parenting styles. Don't blame your parents for doing this, okay? You have to get through that too, of don't shame and blame your parents because they didn't know. This wasn't around. We didn't know really what this was. We haven't had 17 years of research. This has changed our whole, I think, universe. Brene Brown's research and her vulnerability to move through something that is super, super tough that no one's ever done before. So I'm a little crazy about it. So I'm going to leave this up. I'm not going to take the time to watch it. I had it up. Just please watch it with your kids. Okay. This is a child's hole over here, so it's the empathy versus sympathy. It's 3.5 minutes long. It's about what empathy really is and sympathy. Now, as you watch this with your kiddo or yourself, it's 3 minutes on YouTube. Just remember there's one more step to this. So you can huck a sandwich down to somebody in their hole. You can take the ladder out from the hole so they can't get out. You can smother them, okay? So just think of all the other ways that we do things to cause people to not feel safe and not feel understood. So I always do the analogy of then there's vindictiveness where people pull the ladder out. And I think pretty much everybody's had someone pull the ladder out from underneath them and say, oh, you just stay down in that hole. I'm going to take your ladder too. And that's super vindictive. It's super passive aggressive. It's opposite of empathy. So just remind yourself of that when you watch that movie, that little cartoon. So let's recap, and then we'll have a few minutes. So clear boundaries. Number 1, connected to your values. If you want to combat shame in your parenting style, in your home, because this is everybody, right? And 75% of the time when your kid's at school, what's happening? What's happening in their school? What's happening with bullying? What's happening when they come home? So making sure that you're connected so you can talk about shame and, wow, I feel like a flawed person. And I've had lots of teens, their self-talk is, I'm ugly, I'm stupid, I'm fat, I'm this, so when you have a teen that's constantly saying that, I don't have anyone disagree. Oh, no, you're not, that's rescuing, right? Just sit in their ugly space for a minute. Do you see that? The difference between saying, "Oh no, you're not. You're not. Don't say that about yourself. You're not ugly. You're not. You're pretty. Oh, those glasses look good on you. No, the kid bullied me today at school, and those glasses are ugly." That was one scenario that a group member from my other job, was asking me about. Is their 9-year-old daughter, like all of a sudden had these beautiful new glasses, and she was completely bullied from the get-go, and then she hated them, and she thought, and it turned into, I'm ugly. So here's my glasses that don't look good on me because someone told me they didn't, and now I'm ugly. So what does that mean? That is shame, deep shame. So, wow, it seems like you're feeling ugly right now. It seems like you are really feeling like and you repeat exactly back what they say. That's emotional coaching. We don't take it away from them. That's rescuing. Sit in their dark, in their hurt, in their, in their pain of feeling less than for just however long it takes. And you sit through that and you model that. And wow, I remember feeling flawed when I was your age because my teacher told me that I did the worst on my spelling test ever. And so ever since that moment, I thought I was a dumb person or a bad speller. Think about it. So it stems from back there. So just relate and empathize with them instead of correct them. So do your homework, do your own work, do your own worthiness, tell your story, show up. How do you show up? Same way, sit in their space, show up as best we can. Don't shame yourself for not being perfect, because perfectionism is not. So a lot of this, if you want to download an Audible, it's called Imperfection Parenting, The Gifts of Imperfection in Parenting. So she has a book of Gifts of Imperfection, but she has an Audible that's just on Audible. It's about parenting. So I've listened to that more than a dozen times. It's one of the best Audibles I have of her. So it talks about that, how to create shame resilience with play, creativity, and connection. Practice courage, vulnerability, and imperfection. Because we can't be perfect. And we can't beat ourselves up for being, imperfect. We just have to be imperfect. That's a celebration. So any questions? I know that I just fly through it. I feel like I go fast, but that's why you can watch this again. You can look at the PowerPoints again. You can forward it to your significant other and watch it together is my best scenario, is because obviously if you have two people doing this, we got to be, and it should be on here, right? Should, that consistency, right? So two people, consistent parenting is always awesome to do. Okay. So, Heather.
We don't have any questions pop up yet. And like Carol said, you can unmute yourself and ask the question, or you can send it to me privately in the chat and I'll ask it for you. But we did have some feedback. So one person said, very glad I signed up for this. Love the information being provided.
Welcome.
And then someone else said, this is really great info. I've already texted my wife. We noticed we were often saying to our 3-year-old, sorry, it scrolled. To our 3-year-old, you know better than that. I realized, thanks to this information, how shame-based that is. Instead, we will just keep reinforcing good behavior and reminding him like we would with a puppy.
Perfect. Oh, it's perfection. Yes. Oh, you know better. You should have done this. You should have you should have done your homework. Now you can't play. You should. Yeah, that's shame too. Yeah.
And then you're going to share with me what that book is so I can send it to him an email, right?
Which book?
I don't know.
So
all the books you talked about.
So I didn't click to the last one. So by the way, yeah, sorry. So Bradshaw's from 1988. This is, he started some healing, the shame back then. But here's all your Brene Brown resources up till 2015, So of course the Braving the Wilderness came out after that. It just goes on and on. So these are all the TED Talks. This is the Audible that I talked about, Gifts of Imperfection, Parenting is an Audible. So I love to download so that's all those.
And then we've got a couple more questions coming in. So one person said, I would like more content on what to say to kids when they say I'm fat, etc. How do I sit in the dark with them and still have them feel better?
Okay, so when have you felt flawed, not good enough? You share that with them. Wow, I feel, so we are having body image issues, right? And we're having self-concept issues. So we just have to sit in that and say, okay, when do you feel fat? I mean, get curious, right? So we seek to understand them. Number one is always ask a question. It seems like you're kind of feeling flawed about your body. When do you feel like that? What is it that you are comparing yourself with? You know, well, we know that this is a huge issue with society right now. I mean, it's just huge, and it's younger and younger and younger. Now, if we have body image stuff that goes into acting on that, which is withholding food, purging, binging, you know, then that's, you know, we get into eating disorders, then they need to be seen. But that's just a normal, we have to remember that this is a normal developmental stage, especially with our society of shame, you know, shame society. I mean, we have an epidemic with shame and society. So when is it that you feel flawed? It seems like you're having a body image issue. It seems, and then later, after you sit in the emotion, I'm really glad you shared that with me. I'm so glad that you felt safe enough to share your vulnerability, because that's such a vulnerable. See, and that's a celebration to me. I'm like, well, let's go get a dang Slurpee then. I mean, seriously. I mean, tell me more about this. Tell me when you're feeling flawed. I'm so glad you came to me with that. And then the child feels understood. They know that they can come to you with other issues and maybe even a solution. So that's emotional coaching next. And here's the solution to, hey, let's come up with a solution about when you feel flawed about your body. What are we going to do about it? Because that's just a thinking error, right? It's just a thinking error. It's thought, feeling, and behavior. So we go to the thought, oh, wait, we have a feeling of being flawed. And then what's the behavior? And we teach our children that. We teach our child how to go to that. And so the behavior is what? Throwing up or doing something else, right? That's a good one.
Okay. Okay, from here we are over on time, so you guys are more than welcome to stay in and keep asking questions, but I just wanted to thank everyone for attending, and I will email all this information out to you, and go ahead and go to our website and register for next month's. Like Carol said, it's going to be the second Wednesday of each month, and you can go on there and register right now if you'd like to. So with that being said, I'm going to keep reading questions. Feel free to stay or go, whatever you want to do. So with your last comment, someone had said about kids criticizing themselves, I recommend first start off with a praise, then as the instructor advises to ask a question, I would ask, what do you think you could do to help you feel better about yourself?
Okay, but that's going to the fix mode though. So praise is not, so last class was about appreciation instead of praise. I don't encourage praise at all. So what you do is if you start with a praise, you completely disvalidated that statement. I feel ugly about my glasses. So this is exactly what the father did is, no, you don't. Those glasses are perfect. You remember you liked them and you picked them out at the store. You were fine with them last week. No, they're pretty. You look pretty. So all that did was completely disvalidate her feeling ugly. So we don't want to praise and we don't want to disvalidate. We want to sit in it and say, wow, you're feeling like you don't belong, or you feeling ugly, or, you know, I'm really sorry. That's empathy. I'm really sorry that you're feeling not okay about yourself right now. That's the statement that we need to hear. That's what kids need to feel understood and heard and seen. When we go to fix mode, which is a praise, we've completely lost that right off the bat. That's just research. That's just how many ways of emotional coaching, love and logics, and how to combat shame. So then we go into the solution later on, and then yes, what's the solution? Are you having a thinking error? Error basically. A behavior is the self-talk of I'm a flawed kid because I have to wear glasses. Well, then we have to get into bullying. She was bullied. That's not the glasses aren't the issue. It's the bullying.
Right.
So,
okay, I've got two more questions.
okay.
So This one is, I'm interested to know if this applies to kids eating as well, like telling them they need to eat dinner before having a snack.
Yes. So delaying gratification, that's eating before you have a snack. I talked about that in one of my parenting, is that has to be taught before the age of 5, which, of course, after 5, keep doing it. But so what happens is that's back to choices and power of and Love and Logic's technique of choices. So here's your choices. You can do this and this. Here's your 2 limits. You can eat this first or this first. Your dinner, whatever, somehow, especially when they're younger, you're giving them power, because food is one of the power struggles, because it's kitchen, bathroom, and bedroom, the most essential rooms. So back to the question, how do you get a child to have power over making that good choice of having dinner first before a treat? So, I mean, there's just a science to that. It's choices, it's control, it's giving them control, and then using it as a reward system instead of a hindrance. But
Cool. Okay, then the last question, it's pretty long, so bear with me. Hopefully I don't stumble over.
you're fine.
Okay. Hi, we have a toddler who we have always kept open communication with, and he's been great at having a lot of self-confidence. However, we are struggling with our older sons. We get them every other weekend, and the way they are raised are so different from our own values, we find it very difficult to communicate sometimes. There is conflict nearly every time they visit, and after they go, my husband and I reflect. And I know we need to ease up and not blame the kids. The frustration is very hard on the relationship now. The values that we try to teach them are so easily forgotten when they return to their other home. And since we only get them 4 days a month, we know it is hard for them to retain our values too. Do you have any suggestions?
So I did a co-parenting class. Have Heather send you that, or I will. You can email me at Carol, CARYL, at bloomquesthale.com. You can email me anytime, and I'll forward you that, and I'll forward you anything, But there's a co-parenting class that I did earlier that was just about that kind of stuff. But this is different when you don't have full power over what is done, and the majority of the time in another house. So with any household, it's on the fridge. Here's our top 3 values: respect, health, and trust, worthiness, whatever it is. You find your value systems, and they come up with this as a family together. And so here's the rules and the expectations. So once again, boundaries and limits. And then here's the boundaries and limits around our value system. So if they forget, it's really hard to do this consistently because you don't have them enough. So you got to let up on some of that for sure. But at the same time, it's just consistency. Now helping visualize it, putting it on the fridge, that doesn't, go along with our value systems. And then here's the consequence if we hurt ourselves or others, or you scream at me, or you lied to me, because one of our value system was trustworthy. So so you have to, whatever time you have, if it's 12 hours or 24 hours, it doesn't matter. It's the same consistency. But at the same time, I get that that's tough, because you've got to redo it every single time they come back, and the child has different environments like that. It's just different. And I feel your pain. It's just difficult when you have different values in different homes. So do the best you can, but the best thing is visual, and then picking the value systems. So if you haven't done that, try that. If you've done that, email me and I'll send you that co-parenting one and some more ideas.
Yep. Does anyone else have any questions? You can turn your mic on and ask them, or you can send me a chat real quick. Like we mentioned, I will be sending out the recording of this and all the resources she talked about, that YouTube video link, everything. So you'll have it all. And it doesn't look like anyone's submitting any questions. So I think that's it. Thank you guys for joining us. And like I said, we will be here next month. So feel free to register.